Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our second panel discussion on the exhibition entitled An Exhibition in Several Acts, a Lexigram of Ideas. The exhibition is hosted by the Meta Foundation. I'm Sara Hallatt and will be in the background for most of the conversation. I would like to welcome our panelists. Maria is the curator of this exhibition and she will be leading this conversation. Grace is one of the artists participating in the exhibition, as well as Iñakalo. There are many more artists participating, but as Maria will describe, the exhibition is in several acts, and this particular conversation is going to walk you through one of those acts. If you have any questions, pop them into the question box and we will answer them as we go along. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Maria.
Thank you, Sara. Good evening, everybody. Hi, Grace, and hi, Iñaki. Welcome to the second act of our exhibition. As Sara said, the title is a series of acts, an exhibition in several acts, a lexigram of ideas. The show, I will recap with every presentation what the show is about so that it gives some kind of context of what we aim to achieve through the curation of it. And in essence, the show focuses on selected artists from August House and their relative practices. Because of the elaborate nature of the different artists in this institution, I decided alongside Krista D, who is the other co-curator, and Sara, that the show alludes to a series of conversations in essence. And each conversation is encapsulated in an act, riffing off the idea of theater and the theatricality around artistic practice, as well as the social encounters between people in different settings. Specifically now, after this long forced pause, everyone has been kind of anticipating the social interaction, and this too is why we decided that the conversations are to kind of exist in acts and at the same time be part of a broader discourse. So the first act was in essence the opening act of the show, and it was a conversation around ideas of strategies of being, which was with Roland Gunst and Johan Stegman, two artists also within the auspices of August House. And the second act is Monologues and Contemplations, while the third act and the final act is called Metamorphosis and is represented by work with Iñakalo Maleke, Roland Gunst, Percy Maimela, and Bambo Sibilla. So without further ado, again, we will go into the second act. So the show, in essence, is until the 29th of November. I do want to invite everyone this Saturday to come along to a physical walkabout. Of course, every precaution and requirement will be abided by given the COVID rules and regulations. So please join us from, I believe it was 11 o'clock. At August House on the 4th floor, and below is the address. Okay, so this in essence is the second act, and on the left-hand side you can see a wall in which Iñaki and Grace's work is featured, whereas on the left-hand side you can see three walls, but in essence the further right-hand wall is the one in which Nyaki's work features. The reason why I'm opening the presentation with this with these fisheye lens images is because I also want to state that the show exists in a virtual tour, a 3D format, which can be found, links can be found both on Facebook and on the exhibition's website. A more direct and physical presentation or representation of the layout is in essence this one. And two, it's taken from the virtual tour. But what I wanted to talk about and ask viewers to think about is that monologues and contemplations are also activities that in essence, just like everybody goes through, so do the artists in their work. And they want to elicit that potential reading through their practices and what it is you see. So another image is in the foreground, you can see Grace's work, a selection of her more recent works. And in the background, again, you can see a panel of Nyaki's work. The artists, through their practice, have dealt with very personal and kind of introspective moments. In the process of coming up with the concept alongside Krista, was thinking about keywords that could potentially trigger some kind of, again, reading by an outside viewer of the work, and words that Nyaki spoke of were vulnerability, storytelling, while Grace described her work as dealing with the void and how one would think about experiencing a void and in some kind of transition between a physical and a metaphysical space. So this is a broad presentation of Nyaki's work. That's the way we flow. And what is interesting about it is that Nyaki tends to, in essence, re-narrate, if I could call it that, Nyaki, stories that she tends to write. She writes short stories and then weaves those kind of narratives in work through puncturing, through intuitively making marks using threads and puncturing material that tends to be quite vulnerable, at times paper, at times wax paper, and the effects that has. Nyaki, can you speak a little bit about this process, this intuitive process of storytelling through these abstractions, and how perhaps you feel this fits in the title of the act of which you're part of?
Well, I think I've always been interested in finding ways of, I think with my artistic process, I've always been interested in finding ways of how I could speak about some of my own experiences in ways that don't directly reference me. And I always tend to use certain symbols or just something abstract to do that. And with this particular body of work or this drawing at the moment, this was a work that was starting to think about personal space, but also the public space and trying to articulate that in the context of a drawing. And a lot of the time, or well, specifically in this work, I was very much interested in how I started. I was using thread and charcoal, and I was interested in moments where the two almost matched each other, where the charcoal started to take the texture of the thread. And I guess storytelling for me has become another way of journaling. I start to think of my drawings like journaling, and and also another way of writing short stories, because as you were mentioning, the short stories in a way are an extension. The drawings are an extension of the content that I write, the short stories that I write, where I'm starting to think about my own experiences in the public space or in a personal space. So
Fantastic. I wanted to draw a little bit more attention to the detail. Can you talk a little bit about the spontaneity with which you do this mark making? Because as much as it is spontaneous, it is somewhat linear in its final presentation.
Yeah.
And of course, one way of reading is from left to right. But at the same time, all of these elements, in essence, can be a variety of stories that do not necessarily need to have a linear reading.
I guess.
Spontaneous.
I think, it is very spontaneous, but I think also in the process there are moments where I do become conscious of where I position different marks, and there are moments where I alternate, and it goes back to the spontaneity again. I think the linearity quality starts to come in when I start to step back from the work and really have a look at what it looks like. Does it make sense for me as well? And also, is this the kind of story that I want to tell? So there are moments where I'm alternating between logic and illogic. Yeah.
Nyaki, there is something very performative also about, obviously, the act of mark making, the act of piercing, but you have also in the past, unfortunately I don't have a visual presentation of it, but in the past you have used these mark makings in a performance, and the marks exist on a raincoat like transparent fabric that that you presented the work on. Do you think, I mean, can you speak a little bit about, is there a link between a performance, or is that just a reading? Is there a link between your practice as being also a performative act or not?
No, it's both. It's both.
How so?
I think, well, with performance, it was a medium that I was starting to work with recently, and the raincoat was the first point of departure where I started to consider working in performance. And I was looking, again, the story of where I was, the thought process of writing started from that particular raincoat, where I wanted to work with stitching and using the body as a kind of score, as a kind of sort of using the body to as a tool that can also, well, it does perform anyway. And so that raincoat piece was initially opened up the conversation for the works that you see on paper. And in terms of performativity in the drawings themselves, I am interested a lot in movement. And I think I'm always interested in exploring how I could articulate that in drawing, and how I can represent movement, how I can represent these figurative, sometimes abstract bodies on a page. And I think I'm always looking at how I can sort of explore that. I don't know if I'm answering the question.
Yeah.
But the raincoat really was a costume that I made for a performance that was related to a sound exhibition, and I was using the body as a score. I was collaborating with a woman. Her name is Binta, and she's also a seamstress. And we were literally working on this raincoat together. She had her own set of stitches and I had my own. And there are moments where you can, I mean, if for someone who was following the process of stitching, they would be able to tell the difference between the two styles. And so that collaborative moment really opened up my interest in working with this medium, with stitching, and exploring other ways of how I could write and create these notations.
This brings me to the contemplative kind of act, and well, again, I keep using the term reading, but the way I see your work is that it's quite quiet, it's quite contemplative, it's quite introvert, it's meditative, and I guess also the act of stitching resonates in those sentiments, which is why I felt that the work very much speaks to these moments of reconsideration, or thinking of things. And yet this is a complete at times antithesis, in the sense that spontaneity renders this false. So it's a very beautiful balance almost that I have as a feeling that I come out when looking at your work. But let me take another step and move to Grace. Now, Grace, your work was included again within the act of Monologues and Contemplations, because it does ask of the viewer or individuals to reconsider what it is that they would feel outside of a physical space. There is something very metaphysical, esoteric at moments, perhaps, that you require of a viewer. And this kind of, these very physical, very structural forms, which are, well, I guess, I mean, one of the titles of the work is Monolith, but these masses that you have created, they kind of speak to very considered, very engineering-based structures. And yet you also present them as portals, in a sense, portals into something that people at times I think find difficult to think about, this void, this nothingness. You also described the work by using the words uncanny, that a feeling that you want to allude into a viewer is a feeling of uncanniness. But at the same time, there are very particular kind of forces that you elicit by the scale of the work. And I mean, the works are very small, yet the thoughts you want, or the feelings that you want people to experience, are very big. I want to, before I ask you to describe a little bit your practice and your kind of evolution and why you thought these concepts are something that you want to explore, can I play a small sound clip from a discussion that you and I had? Because part of the show, the physical presentation, was one where we have elicited viewers to write on the wall the thoughts and the feelings that they experience when viewing the work. So here comes. If you were to ascribe a sound to your work, how do you think, what is it that you would like the viewer to hear?
There's two sounds, one of which is the loud noise of nothingness, so no sound. Say the sound of a black hole. Yeah, I would say the sound of a black hole.
So I downloaded NASA's recording of a black hole.
Yes.
Can you elaborate? Can you describe for those who want to understand your work and your intentions? What is it that you've been wanting to convey?
Well, when I started, first of all, good evening, everyone. When I mean, my fascination with the concept of the void really started from when I was a kid and I was learning about space for the first time. And my sister, who was a year above me in primary school, she was the one who came home running to me, and she told me, guess what, there's these things out there that are very large and spherical in shape, and there's this somewhat of a portal at the time. That's what, kids, that's how we talk, where everything disappears and nothing comes out. And I was like, but that's not possible. Like in my head, as a kid, that I couldn't make sense of that, but I was curious. And I think that curiosity has stuck with me for many years. And so I became interested in this other world of which I don't know much about, only through documentaries, but I'm so curious to find out what it would be like to be in that world and to be in that space. And it's a space that is very uncanny and very unfamiliar, but what it would actually mean to exist and to float in a space like that. And so I kind of started to imagine these other worlds, and without knowing that I was doing this in my work, and over time I realized that this fascination was being reintroduced into my sketches. And with the sketches, it was really just a departure from that curiosity. I was creating a structure, but it's essentially a structure that evokes a sense of falling into this unknown nowhere that exists for an infinite space and time. And I guess for me, a piece of me wants the viewer to imagine how that little small me felt when I was learning about black holes, but also to kind of get a sense of what being in a space like that would actually mean for them. It has different meanings for different people. And that's, for me, became another fascination. And so, yeah, that's where I departed.
Thanks. The three-dimensionality and the geometric shapes that kind of form all of these imaginary structures are fascinating, because there's so many possible readings that one could have. It's the potential sci-fi elements, the potential metaphysical contemplations, but at the same time, what really struck me is that these geometric shapes have for long existed in various cultures, from Southeast Asia to Latin America to Africa. They became canonized in the Western art history movements, through various artists and Malevich and Picasso's, and the kind of geometric art forms, the abstraction movements, and they're so opposite to this organic symmetry, and yet what you are seeking is a very kind of organic feeling, because, as I said earlier, they're voids, they're portals into the metaphysical spaces, and cosmology also. And I find these beautiful potential readings again of the work, because they're so heavy, they're so small, and yet they speak of such grandiose ideas, of which the mind, when it delves into it, can almost explode from the thinking of it, of what is nothingness, what is the void, how is this oppressive, or how is this enlightening, or what is this search for self realization, because we exist within an environment, but we also exist within a broader schematic, within a broader cosmology of things. I don't want to sound too esoteric about things, but the mind is beyond, and yet the shapes are so physical, so tangible. So there is this kind of tangibility, and yet you seek for an intangible sensation. So the contradiction is very, very apt for me. I'm trying to get to the next image. Can you talk to us about Falling Tombs?
Yes, so Falling Tombs was another drawing of mine, in which I was basically, so in my work, sometimes I play around with perspective, and sometimes I shift the perspective in a way that it feels very uncomfortable. And if you imagine it as falling into a space or an object that looks like this, it starts to feel a little uncomfortable, because you don't have a sense of your perspective is slightly shifted. And so in this work, I did that, and I wanted to give the viewer a sense of being in it, or being either almost facing a space that is unknown and is anticipating falling into this deep hole, and also just to kind of create this structure that also carries this hole in a sense. And so that's why I titled it Falling Tomb, because it feels very heavy, but it also gives a sense of you falling into it. So yeah.
Yeah, there is definitely some kind of force that acts on you.
Yes. Yeah.
Grace, what is also interesting about you is that you, having studied art at Wits, have decided to potentially explore alternatives. I mean, there's something very architectural, something very kind of engineering in a sense in there, and can you tell the viewers what it is that you are currently doing? I mean, your studies with anticipation to do what?
Well, I'm anticipating in studying more about architecture. So we'll see how that works out. But my interest basically, they've been there for a number of years in this field. I think more so from a philosophical aspect, not just from an aesthetic aspect. There's a lot of philosophy that is that really excites me with regards to the field of architecture and what architects have for many years been trying to convey some ideas through a physical structure. And I found that very interesting. And it just so happens that whilst I was studying at Wits, I was learning about these architects, and I was learning about artists who were working in this way as well, not just architects, and how they wanted to create, almost created spaces that were that gave us a sense that you were in a vast space, an infinite space. And it's almost a play of play with light, with lighting, and play with actual physical space. But I found that very interesting. And I, as an artist, was wondering what that actually means, what different kinds of spaces do to a viewer and different viewers as well. And how does that affect our perception of time, and how does it affect our perception of space and how we exist within that space? I found very interesting. And so that's why I'm hoping to be studying this field very soon. And yeah, and it came from that point. But I also was very interested in, you know, this idea of trying to encapsulate this experience in a physical space. It's interesting, but also you wonder how possible that is, right? Because you're essentially talking about ideas that are very vast. And how does one try and encapsulate that in a physical object or a structure? And I imagine that to be something that's very challenging for me. But somehow it kind of excites me, and it makes me want to actually discover how I could potentially do this, and to do this with the medium of painting and printmaking and drawing, but to actually create these kinds of spaces would be very exciting for me. So yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about the monochromatic nature of the work, and the fact that it is kind of suspended in space?
So I always imagine these structures to be suspended in space, almost like imposing themselves in your physical world, and almost as if they were somewhat, I always imagine them as just, you know, like the monolith in Space Odyssey. You know, it's this object, but this object almost it has a lot of representation within it. But then also, for me, when I used to watch Space Odyssey, started to feel the monolith started to almost feel like it was a character in the movie. And so I always imagine these spaces to be still objects, but to almost be almost a character in the real world in a sense. And so I always kind of suspend them in space, because I imagine them to do that. If I could imagine them, they would literally just be hovering in space and just kind of being there and just being present, which is for me a very intimidating idea, but it's also something that for me sparks curiosity. And so, yeah, and that's basically why they are hovering in space. And with regards to the monochromaticness of them, I think we spoke about this during our talks, is with my work, I try not to have a lot of, I enjoy the monochromatic, I guess you can say, tone of the works. I know some of them they do have a little bit of like a Payne's gray kind of bluish color, but for me, it's something that feels melancholic, but also very silent, and not that they're trying to impose any emotions, or almost as if they're just objects, and the only thing that kind of separates them from, I mean, if anything, they're just kind of objects with light falling onto them, and have these various openings that almost require you to engage with them, or if not, give you the sense of falling into these portals in a sense. So I find that very interesting.
Sorry, ladies, I was trying to unmute myself. But Nyaki, I wanted to, sorry, I've kind of gone with my presentation a little bit ahead. Oh God. But can you also perhaps speak to the monochromatic nature of your work?
Pardon?
Can you
I thought
speak
there were
early work and why you chose to use black on white and charcoal and thread to depict your narration?
Yeah, I think initially when I started, the first sets of drawings that I did were in black and white, and I guess it was partly to mimic the whole like the black ink on the white page. But also at the time, with the first set of works that I did, because they were made in a different context, they were speaking to my identity within a white space. But I kind of extended that narrative a little bit more, and was interested also in the materiality of working with very vulnerable materials that somehow contrasted each other. I was interested in the black thread, I was interested in the charcoal, and of course the paper itself, and seeing how I could speak about certain narratives in a very simple way. For me, there wasn't a philosophical or a really sort of academic relation to the materials that I was working with. Well, when I started to work with them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Fantastic, because no, it was just to kind of like get a sense, because from my understanding, your earlier work did use very primary colors. Well, no colors, black on white and black translucent. So, but you're absolutely right. There is something very distinctive and poignant about the contrast that this creates. And I mean, that's why I'm riffing off of what Grace has kind of said, because there is a force, there is strength, and there is weight on using these monochromatic approaches to the work. Going slightly further, I mean, going into the next drawing, which is the one that has introduced a lot more color and a lot more intensity in terms of the stitching and the composition. Can you again perhaps speak a little bit about this work called Enclosed?
Yeah. Well, with Enclosed, it was a work that I made it earlier this year, just before lockdown. And it was one of those works that I had to make, partly because I was coming back from finishing my postgraduate, and I had done residencies, and I needed to continue within my practice. And so I was making this work at home along with another work that's also in the exhibition. And those really were, I guess, gestures that tried to motivate me to continue working in this language of drawing, but also understanding what else I could do with stitching. But this piece, it started to. This is where I was starting to introduce very vibrant colors. I worked with watercolor and charcoal and pastels. And here I was, and this is all on wax paper. And again, I was still carrying on with that theme of vulnerability. I was also carrying on with seeing how I could, in the areas where the page is torn, but I was interested in, trying to fix what can't be fixed on the page, and the moments where I would have sort of oversaturated or rubbed out too much, just to also get a very faint, like a very subtle, almost subtle color. But yeah, I think I'm interested in that, in exploring the palette. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm trying to unmute myself, and it's a really bad. Anyway, I'm trying to navigate the computer. Nyaki and Grace, what do you think about the general reading, I guess, of this act? What do you think about each other's works? Do you find them complementary? I mean, it's terrible asking to put you on the spot publicly.
I was actually going to say that while about a year ago, I was doing research into Sumie. I believe that's how it's pronounced, or Sumie or something like that. Sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. Apologies. But basically, it's I believe it's a traditional Japanese form of art making where you use the white background is essentially like represents the empty space or the abyss, and whatever dark mark you put on the paper is the form that is beginning to form into this empty space. And I think with my work and Nyaki's work, that correlates really well with this white background and a dark mark that's beginning to form in this empty space. And I think that's that's very interesting and exciting to see. And I think that's where there's definitely a strong link between our works. Yeah.
Nyaki, do you have any comments about the juxtaposition of your work?
I think for starters, it's quite, I mean, even with the piece on the left that's colorful, it's interesting to see how bold and how the color black really does stand out. And in both of the works, sort of the works that you've juxtaposed together. But I think also it's quite interesting the various shapes and the various shapes that come out that Grace is speaking to, and yeah, I think it works.
As I said earlier, for me the intention was to introduce again within this idea of conversation, almost like this similar points of view that come from different perspectives, from different angles, and the kind of inorganic and very organic nature of both of your works, respectively, for me, created this incredibly interesting conversation. And again, because there's something very quiet and yet so very loud in both of your practices, I felt that Monologues and Contemplations was an apt title for this presentation. To kind of also not just speak to this particular act, but to kind of broaden the presentation to how it is that you also fit within Act 1 and Act 3. For me, the work of both Roland, and I do encourage all viewers to please either take a look at the virtual tour or join us this Saturday, if time and space permits, to take a look at the physical presentation. So going back to the way that the other two acts fit with this presentation is that there was something very, what is the term, tangible, and yet intangible, that, for instance, within Act 1, Strategies of Being, was speaking to how is it that the artists navigate space and time, and does their practice, in essence, mimic how it is their worldview is presented, and how it is they operate within this worldview on a daily basis. And the truth is that this too speaks to this act in the sense that it appears that these are also your kind of strategies of being, of thinking about life, of thinking about space, of thinking about art, of thinking about narration or storytelling, or how it is I mean, the thinking process is an internal process. And then in the third act, which speaks to metamorphosis, I mean, again, through these thinkings, contemplations and monologues, to use obviously the title, you also convert, you also shift, you also shapeshift, your mental spaces, your practices evolve, and they too are not static. So I think that I think that the intention, obviously, being somewhat subjective as a curator, I believe that I have, alongside my colleagues, managed to to translate thoughts about how seeing is not necessarily always about a two-dimensional way of being. Seeing and hearing and learning allows for all sorts of interpretations. And in essence, it also tweaks at your mind and asks you to not see things at face value. And I think this was also partially the intention, that people should not be intimidated by seeing things they don't understand. And through conversations or through dialogues or through presentations, they get a sense that what it is they have read might be what it is was intended by the artist. And at the same time, not at all, but it opens another way of reading, reading a work, an art, an act, a mark, an intention. So I don't know, do you guys have any questions for me?
I mean, I just have a comment, I think, just to add on to what you were saying now, like opening up a point of entry. I did get that sensation that feeling with how you juxtapose the first works by the entrance. They do give me that. The first point of reference I got was, that Alice in Wonderland, when you're like the work when she jumps into the hole. So like, you have this very dramatic piece that kind of flows into this other portal, this other world, which then opens up another conversation, another medium. So I think that was quite a strong approach.
Thank you. I'm glad you think so. Grace, do you, I don't know, do you have any questions for Nyaki or for me?
I think it's more it's a comment. I think you mentioned something about how artists, how we engage with the world around us, and something to the likes of that. And what I find very exciting about, what we do as artists is, as we evolve, so does our work, and there's no separation from the two. And I find that very exciting, because essentially it's almost as if the work we produce as artists it's not necessarily stagnant, it evolves along with our ideas and how we view ourselves within the world. And I think what's also very exciting, I mean, just looking at me and Nyaki's work, is there's a lot of similarities in our work, and there's also some differences as well, which I find very exciting. The fact that her works feel very organic, and as mine are very compact and geometric, but yet still have some similarities within the two, kind of speaks to that idea of, as subjects, as human beings, there are some similarities in how we view the world, but there's also different perspectives. And I think that's really exciting to see in an exhibition like this.
Fantastic. Listen, I have a question from a gentleman called Jeffrey, and there are two questions. One is addressed to Grace and the other one is addressed to Nyaki.
Okay.
So, question to Grace. Astounding work. How does the idea of light and lightness, how does the ideas of light and lightness influence your approach to black holes?
Oh, wow. Thank you for that question. And thank you. For me, as I don't study astrophysics. I'm not an astrophysicist, but I always had this idea of, the idea of a black hole it seems like it's a very heavy it is a very heavy object, but has this idea of weightlessness in deep space. And I found that very, that combination between weight and weightlessness very exciting as to juxtapose in the work, and how to also kind of, in a way, kind of introduce that idea through painting and through drawing. And so that's why, I went for the geometric shapes, because for me that felt very heavy, almost like a heavy geometrical piece of concrete in a sense. And I find that combination very exciting to put together. I hope that answers his question. I also, if he's referring to, Jeffrey, if you're referring to the idea of light as in like a light, like an optical light, I also find that also exciting, because essentially, when you talk about light, we're talking about what we see. And whereas with the black hole, it's something, it's somewhat distorts light as well. So I find that, as a kid, I was so fascinated when I learned about that. And in a sense, to me, I almost got the sense that if we distort light, then does that mean we distort our sense of what is real and what is not? Because essentially, I always imagined that when we look at an object and how light falls onto that object, you kind of get a sense of what that object is. And so if now we're distorting that, what does that actually do to how we imagine that object to be? And I really was excited by that kind of idea. And so I hope to create works that were in essence speaking about, light and the lack thereof, but also the duality between weight and weightlessness as well. And I find that very exciting when just thinking about a space and a structure that is like that. So yeah. I hope I answered his question.
I hope so. I hope he feels that you've answered his question. The next question is to Nyaki, and I'm curious in finding out your thinking about drawing, both as conceptual model of movement and stasis, and tying ideas together. Wow.
Well, I'll just reference sort of one of the works that I did for my postgraduate thesis, and it was slightly displayed in a different way. It was a work that was displayed on stilts, and at the time I had read a text by Frederick Gross that was speaking about walking, and in one of the sentences he says that when you walk closer to an object or a mountain, it appears closer. It appears closer or further away, something to that notion. And I was interested that in how drawing no longer that does not only function as something that's static that can be displayed on a wall, but can be something physical that can take over space. And when people walk through the stilts, they encounter different elements that is in front of them. And I think it's not just the physical. It's not only the intention to represent movement in the work, but it's also an intention to get audiences to participate and literally move around drawing and really interrogate the underneath, the sort of the loose strings that are visible, but also to notice the little gentle moments, like the punctured holes, areas that have been erased. So I think it was a conceptual interest to or an experiment to an extent, and also an interest to interrogate what the meaning of language can be in this moment, in this contemporary space, is how can I push audiences to participate, in those two worlds.
Yeah, from what I recall, when I first met you, Nyaki, the performative aspect of the movement and the static nature of your installations tended to be very considered and very considered. Jeffrey has just said questions are answered. Thank you. I'm not quite sure whether there's any other questions. Given that we are on two platforms, one being Zoom and the other one being Facebook, I'm not quite sure whether there's any other ones featured. But can you guys see my screen? What is it that you see?
I see Nyaki's work.
And that's it?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and I see you guys.
Can you guys tell me a little bit about you and I don't know, your lives, your studies, where is it? I mean, Grace, you kind of already mentioned the fact that you're studying and potentially looking at doing architecture. Nyaki, how and where are you with your work, with your practice at the moment?
I think because I recently just moved into a studio, I've been spending these past few months familiarizing myself with studio practice, with having a studio practice. And to an extent, it did feel like a kind of warm up before the final, the actual work begins. Not that I haven't been working, but I think at the moment I'm in a position where, like, I'm transitioning from being in, like, I was doing my postgraduate in a different context, in a different country, and I'm now readjusting to that space and trying to find out what kind of works I can make that can make sense in this context. But also I've acknowledged that because I'm always moving around a lot, I don't exist in like one static space. But as a whole, I'm just really trying to, so I'm focusing on the art. I'm also focusing on my writing as well. And yeah, other bigger goals as well outside of the arts.
Are you thinking about what have you thought about parallel to this existing work of different mediums and different formats? And the same question goes to Grace.
Yes, definitely. Definitely, because I just recently, I'm in my studio space. I just started going back to collecting various objects. I've got like a door which I want to turn into a sculpture. Like I'm trying to cut it up and work on wood, because I also have an interest with working, exploring wood. And yeah, I had another thought, but I completely forgot it.
A variety of consistency. Sorry to interrupt you.
What is
that?
Variety
of consistencies, and do you think that it has the potentials of I mean, not do you think? I mean, obviously, it has the potentials for you for exploration of malleability and
I didn't catch the first part of the question.
Sorry. What I was it wasn't really a question. It was more kind of like a statement of curiosity, in the sense that it's interesting that you're exploring wood, because it's got so many kind of consistencies and potential facets.
Yeah.
And looking at you working with such fragile material to move to such a potentially strong and sturdy material would be an incredibly interesting journey to follow.
Yeah, I think the first encounter that I had with wood is that I made very small panels. I'd shown you some of them in the studio, but I was trying to make stamps. So, but then it ended up, I mean, it's still part of a printmaking process as well, but yeah. But I don't, at the moment for the door, I don't know what exactly is going to happen to it, but.
Grace, you've also been known for a much larger scale work, also using, funnily enough, wood, MDF primarily. Can you, I don't know, where are you thinking of going with that?
I'm hoping to start working with steel very soon. I think I've been for many years, I've just been very intimidated by steel, but I want to try and work with it as a medium and explore and see what possible shapes can come out of that, because I find it's an interesting material to work with. And so yeah, I'll see how that plays out at a later stage. At the moment, I'm really doing a lot of small prints and drawings, especially because it's since the whole lockdown, we've been restricted to just working with what we have. And I mean, in the earlier stages of the lockdown, I don't even know if a lot of the art shops were open, but I just had paper in my studio, in my small little, it's not even a studio, it's my desk. And so I've just been making little prints and some drawings. But now at some point I've always loved sculpture and installation art. And because I've been so fascinated with just shapes in general and how I can manipulate those shapes, I think working with steel would be quite exciting. So I'll see how that works out.
Yeah, most definitely. It's super challenging too.
Yes.
I mean, the material.
Yes, yeah. But yeah, definitely wood is my favorite, because I find it's accessible. I've worked with it for a number of years. When I was still studying at Wits, I was always in the woodwork shop, and so it's a very familiar material to me. And so now it's me kind of moving away from it is also a little bit daunting as well, because when you start doing something different that you've been curious about for so long, but you've been so used to working one way, it starts. But I'm excited to see where that will go as well.
It's great. It's great. I mean, again, looking at these works and the two-dimensional renditions with three-dimensional aspirations, even though some of them are, does texture render it three-dimensional? I mean, there's so many questions, but it's really interesting to hear you want to move away as another phase or another exploration, contemplation on how material can expand on your ideas or
yeah, for sure.
Well, with that, I just wanted to provide the viewers with a small, I'm going to try and exit the sharing, sorry, forgive me, all of these moments, but I wanted to share, I
should have mentioned in the beginning is that I am interested in literature.
I wanted to share with the viewers
And art and finding ways to merge the two practices together.
The website, and this being it, the address is here for everyone to please take a look at our show online. There's two possibilities. One is a guided tour, which has sound attached to it, and one where there is just a self-exploration without guidelines, without assistance, without support, so that
Maria,
you don't feel...
we're just seeing your presentation. Are you trying to show the 3D?
Yes, I thought my screen...
Sorry, we're not seeing that. We're just seeing your presentation. What I can do is put the website link up for everybody into the chat box.
Yes, Sarah, please do. Thank you very much for stating that. I cannot seem to activate, unfortunately, the controls of the sharing.
Good old technology. Give me a second and I'll see if I can help.
Okay, well, I guess then, I don't know, can you see the credits?
Yes.
Good.
You can see, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I know it's 15 minutes before the end of the show, but I really would like to thank the artists, first and foremost, Sara, Krista, Yolanda, and all the other role players for making this possible, which includes Meta Foundation, obviously August House, as it is an institution, Quorum Group, and Gauteng Provincial Government for making this possible. Yeah, I am incredibly proud of this modest and yet so ambitious project. And I'm really grateful to you, Grace and Yaki, for trusting me and the team and everyone behind this with presenting your work in this context.
Yes, thank you so much, Maria and Sara.
I would also like to thank you, Maria. Thank you for hosting this conversation, and obviously for all the incredible hard work that you've done on this exhibition. Without the curator, you know, often these things don't come together with a solid kind of vision. And through all these panel discussions and the 3D immersive tour that I've put the link up for anyone who is interested, your work has been incredible, and thank you very much. We really appreciate it. And thank you to the artists for participating. Of course, without you, your work, the exhibition wouldn't at all be possible. And thank you for taking the time to talk to us. I think there's so much that gets missed when you just walk around the exhibition and you don't have an opportunity to engage with the artists and maybe understand who they are and where they're coming from and their work. I think this discussion has been wholly enlightening for that reason.
Thank you. And I really would like to invite everyone to the, as I said earlier, the walkabout this Saturday and the next and last conversation of our exhibition next week, Thursday, same time, same back channel.
Fantastic.
See you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
And I hope everyone has a lovely evening.
You too.
Good night.
Good night.